Welcome to the People's Forum. Welcome back, America. Welcome back. We have an exciting show today, still continuing on the ADOS topic, but dealing strictly with what crimes are, what the crimes that were being committed against the ADOS population. We have a guest, Nathaniel Davis, Esquire, friend, fraternity brother, just overall great guy. I've known him for over 30 years. He's very passionate about downtrodden, poor, marginalized peoples, and he's always been an activist. Great having you, Nate.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Hey, man, it couldn't happen better. I can't wait to get you in the house. Right now, we're under the gun, so we're just going to hit the ground running.
Okay.
We need to frame out what slavery was, and what crimes were being committed from a penal law standpoint. The kidnapping, rape, robbery, murder, that major group of crimes that's punishable by, in some states, capital punishment, in some states, life in prison.
Yes. Well, slavery was I guess, a legal form of kidnapping of people from all walks of life. I mean, slavery is historically been around since the beginning of time.
Yeah, but just to cut you off momentarily, specifically, American slavery had no laws around it. They just kidnapped those people and brought them here. So there wasn't, at that point, they hadn't even established a country, much less any laws. So there couldn't have been any laws until 1776 when they actually had a country.
That is true. They had no laws. The first slaves were brought here in the late 1600s. Before that, they had indentured servitude, and during that period of time, they tried to enslave the Native Americans, and that was not successful because usually the Native Americans would run away and they couldn't be captured because they were familiar with the land. Mm-hmm. So they went to Africa, they brought over some slaves, they found it to be successful, and then they started importing slaves to this country. But the slave trade before America, had been conducted by England before that. So the slave trade had been around before America was formed.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there was the East India Company, the West India Company. There was a triangle trade going in many different directions, but specifically the American trade. And I don't even really want to deal with Central South America or the Caribbean. I want to really hone in and bring everything right here to the continental U.S.
Okay. All right. And so I guess the slave trade in America became very profitable. You know, people were making money on the transportation of slaves, the selling of slaves, and the labor created by the slaves. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, it was the South was probably one of the richest areas in the country during the slave trade. They were, picking cotton, growing vegetables and fruits and tobacco, and doing all sorts of chores and manual labor that were being not reimbursed, so you had to pay for labor. So everything was basically profit.
I mean, you don't have to be a Wharton Business School graduate like our esteemed president to know that if you have a free labor class that you actually don't have to pay, that it might cost you at most $20 to $25 dollars a pound to load them onto a ship, have a third of them die along the way, and then get them here to America and then quadruple or multiply your money. And at that point, they weren't bringing very many women. They were really only bringing men because the men were disposable. They would be worked for a 3 to 5 year period of exhaustion and death, and then they would just replenish.
Exactly. And on top of that, the conditions they lived in, they were living in the poorest conditions. They didn't feed them properly, no health care of any nature, unless you were a very profitable slave, and you would get a little bit better conditions. But other than that, It was, really, a horrible life. And
I
so
mean,
it was all- and it was
that's
all
like
property.
receiving a car, that you didn't pay a lot for, but you get 5 years of actual use every day without real maintenance. You could just use and then at the end of that 5 years, you throw it away and they give you a brand new car.
Exactly.
Do me a favor. I'd like to, in America, in every state, we have penal law codes, and there's a big five, big six. When I was in the academy, it was Dr. Barks. It was Bake FF. If you use those acronyms let you know the penal law code or definition to a crime. So in Bake FF, we're talking about a burglary, arson, kidnapping, and in this terms of escape for us was punishable by death here in the Americas, and these were all felonies that were committed by physical force. And you're an attorney, I don't have to tell you. Tell America what that means in terms of punishment.
Well, and slavery basically, that was just such a brutal institution for African Americans. And so we were subject to murder, rape, kidnapping, assault, battery, sodomy, brutality, lynchings. It was just every crime that could be committed against a person we were subject to with no penalty
with no redress.
Repeat that one more time.
With absolutely no redress, no court that we could go to, because you could not bring a suit against a member of the white race in a court here in the colonies or the Americas, because we had no standing.
No, we weren't people. We were considered property and chattel. So so we didn't have any redress whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And so we were subject to any type of treatment that the master wanted to put on us. Okay.
I want to ask you a question. As an attorney, and I have the Constitution here in front of me. Let's say post 1776. What was there in the Constitution, meaning amendments, that they used to make us less than people?
Well, basically there was nothing there. We were just property still. 1770, you understand? 1776, you had the leaders of this country had slaves. George Washington had one of the biggest.
Yes, I did some research, and our esteemed first president had 300 plus slaves.
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. The numbers go anywhere from 175 to 600 slaves on 3 different plantations. Madison, 100 plus slaves. Monroe, 75 plus slaves. Jackson, 200 plus slaves. Van Buren, he was a choir boy. He only had 1. Harrison, 11 slaves. John Tyler, 75 to 150. Polk, 25 slaves, plus another 8,000 in land that he received as a gift. Taylor, 150 slaves. I'll keep going on all the way down to Johnson right after Lincoln. He had 8 slaves. And the last president who was actually a Union general was Grant, and he had 1 slave that attended him just as a personal manservant. So this has been something that they've been culpable of. These actors were culpable. If you ask me, there's a RICO case here waiting to be tried.
Well, you understand that. 1776 was a year of Declaration of Freedom for America, and that's when they had certain people in the government who formed the government within the United States who started questioning slavery. Like if we're really about freedom, we have freedom for everyone. However, they were drowned out by those slave owners who were pretty much running the country, and they were rich.
Yeah, they were drowned out by greed, because remember, if in the Continental War, French and Indian War, Spanish American War, all of these wars that took place, Africans, black Americans actually fought. They were actually patriotic. They were involved.
Exactly, and we got nothing out of it. That's the issue. Like, I hate to denigrate people who consider American heroes, but I look at Christopher Addicts like, you fought in the war, you died in the Revolutionary War, but for what purpose? we didn't gain anything.
Well,
We as black people didn't gain anything. Although there were free blacks, that freedom was very tentative. I mean, we look at hit movies like 12 Years a Slave, that they could say you're a runaway slave and you could be a free black man. They could take you into slavery at any time, and you had no rights. You had no recourse at all.
exactly. You had to wait and hope that there would be a well-meaning person that could represent you.
Exactly.
And many times, those people who were well-meaning, because I have to say this, I'll say it plain and simple, all whites were not party to the institution of slavery. Even though you could benefit from it without being party to it, all whites were not party to the institution of slavery. Go ahead, Nate.
No, they were not. I mean, in the South, they will tell you that, listen, most Southerners did not own slaves. That most of the Southerners were poor farmers who did not own slaves, and the plantation owners were few and far between. However, the mentality and institution of slavery was supported by those poor farmers. They believed in the subjugation of the black man, and that was their dream and wish, that to get a farm, to get a plantation, to own slaves. That was their dream, and that was their wish.
Well,
they support.
And I'm not necessarily trying to defend poor farmers or poor European Americans at that time, but they were boxed or they were tricked into a corner. They were given a status, and if by that status meaning a step just above indentured and just above slaves, and in order for them to enjoy the fruits of that status, then you had to be subjugated.
Well, I mean, you didn't have to be, but that's the life they chose.
Under that system.
Under the system, they felt that that they wanted to be a little bit better than the black man, and even though and a lot of times some of those white indentured servants worked closely with the slaves, but they didn't see the brutality that the slaves endured.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got 2 minutes.
And also too, they may not have been slave owners, but they also benefited from slavery because they were hired as the overseers of the properties, or
Exactly. All commerce went through, whether it was mercantile commerce, aggregate commerce. It all went through slaveholders, manufacturers. You had to be part of the process, and you could be burnt out or frozen out or even killed if you didn't take part. They had enacted laws to encourage well-meaning whites not to help slaves. If you were caught assisting one to escape, teaching one to read, if you in fact married one, you yourself could lose your status as a white person and be enslaved for the period of your husband and or wife's natural life, and any children produced from that union were slaves as well. So we've got about 1 more minute left. Nate, can you sum up before the break?
Sure. I mean, right now, I believe in the idea of reparation. The problem is how we're going to get there. How can we convince, with only being 13% of the population, how can we convince the rest of the population to allow us to be compensated for slavery?
All right.
And I know that we've done that for the Japanese Americans who were in internment. We've done that for Jewish Holocaust survivors. We actually gave them money for reparations. But how do we, in this climate with Trump, how do we actually get that to come to fruition? That's going to be the issue that we have. I know that Cory Booker had and some of the other senators have put forth some type of bill to have reparations studied.
Okay. I'm going to stop you for a second because we've only got about 30 seconds left. We're going to pick up. We're going to pick up on the Reconstruction and the post-slavery era. We're going to pick up on some of those ideas that he just spoke about, baby bonds. We're going to pick up on the program that's being headed by Dr. Sandy Doherty of Duke University, Antonio Moore of Tone Talks, and many other people that I'm going to definitely give thanks to. Right back at you.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Welcome back, America. Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with us. What we want to do now is frame this last 15 minutes so that we can not miss anything. We've touched on 1619. We've taken that all the way through to 1865. Now we're going to deal with the 10, 12 years of Reconstruction, and then we're going to go into the Jim Crow era. So like I said, once again, I had attorney Nate Davis, Esquire, on the phone. He should be calling back in. But these are going to be some important topics that we have to deal with. While I have a second until he calls in, I might as well use this time to thank some people who I've been doing a lot of studying on and reading up on. And first, this segment we didn't start with Roy Innes, but in 1969, my father did a speech in reference to reparations and reference to having a reparations plan. So I guess I'll start at home and I'll thank him. I'll go down the list. Dr. Claude Anderson, who I've read many of his books, Powernomics, and he's definitely an inspiration. Dr. William Darity, who is right now spearheading this thing, along with Dr. Derek Hamilton, along with Antonio Moore, Yvette Carnell, my good friend Sean Rochester, who wrote a phenomenal book, who gives you an unapologetic numerical engineer's breakdown of the cost of being black in America, the cost of slavery, and that labor that was extracted from you then and continues to be extracted from you now. Going down that list, Richard Rothstein, who has an incredible book, The Color of Law, which breaks down the American government's complicity in the entire institution. It's an amazing book, it's an amazing read, and it deals with the redlining and the government policies that locked African Americans, Black Americans, out of everything, out of the American dream per se. Dr. Ira Katz, who has a wonderful book, When Affirmative Action Was White, because everybody talks affirmative action, but when you look through history, what you actually see is groups that were here in America from the start of this country receiving stimulus packages and affirmative action every 20 to 30 years, as just a matter of policy. That didn't happen for African Americans. At the end of slavery in 1865, African Americans were summarily kicked into the street, told to leave the plantations or be subject to arrest and imprisonment. And if you stayed on the plantation, then you had to work under a system of sharecropping, which was another 100% tax on your labor, where the former plantation owner, was actually the one doing the accounting, and you had to rely on his or her benevolence to whether or not you broke even or made a profit that year. And just about every year they never made a profit, so they was indentured, and then, so these things, along with our Constitution, which I have here, I think are very, very important to have. I'm going to finish out the list. Philippe Shock Matthews, great interviewer. Dr. Jacqueline Battlelore has a wonderful, wonderful book on whiteness. Our own 44th president, Barack Obama, whom I don't thank for very much, but at least at one point he did acquiesce to the fact that slavery actually did go on and there should be, possibly some sort of redress, although he as well didn't know how. Noam Chomsky, the great linguist, an MIT professor, Robin DiAngelo, Dr. Nell Painter, who has a wonderful book as well on the establishment or the invention of whiteness as a status. And then lastly, my mom, because my mom is a American descendant of enslaved persons from the actual area where General Sherman actually gave out the 40 acres and a mule in an attempt to make us whole in the first 3 to 5 months after slavery. My mother is from what are called the Gullah Islands, an island called St. Simon Island, Georgia, and her mother's from an island called Sapelo Island, Georgia. We trace our roots back to West African people, specifically because we have Igbo landing and we have Guinea Lane and things like that. We know West Africa, whether it was Nigeria, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Mali, that region, Ghana, we know that that's where at least our initial contact took place. So I've got Nate back on the line. We're going to pick up. I've thanked everybody, thanked my mom, so I'm good. And we're going to pick up. Let's go, Nate.
Yes. So good to be back with you. The slavery reparation is an interesting concept because although I believe that that African Americans in America do deserve slavery, actually Africans who were transported from Africa to any Western country should be entitled to slavery, whether Jamaican, Haitian, the Pan-African, South American, blacks who were enslaved in Brazil, America, we all deserve reparations.
Okay. And Nate, I don't want to cut you off, but I'd be remiss, since you're mentioning that, I'd be remiss not to mention that we have brothers and sisters being enslaved right now, right across the top of North Africa into the so-called Middle East in all of these countries. We have Africans right now, I will say it unapologetically, unequivocally, we have Africans right now that are trying to make their way from sub-Saharan Africa through the desert, and when they get to North Africa, as it's called, they are then kidnapped once again, criminalized, and in many cases enslaved. I'm sorry, Nate, go ahead. I didn't want to leave those people out because they're suffering right now. And the groups like Amnesty International and other groups that are actually buying people out of slavery in the era of the UN in 2019. Go ahead, Nate. We got 5 minutes to go.
Just to pick up on that, I know Libya is probably one of the worst areas in which slavery is taking place right now. There's been a study on it, and after the fall of Gaddafi, who actually allowed a lot of black labor into the country and protected them, after he fell, the Libyan people actually did take those people and enslave them and sell them on blocks as we speak. But the reparations.
Well, I have a question. Why is the world turning a blind eye to the fact that there are Africans right now, today, yesterday, tomorrow, next week, being sold into chattel slavery? Why is the world turning a blind eye? I mean, there's got to be some sort of legal redress.
Because the world doesn't care about African Americans. I mean, actually, just African people or people of African descent. I mean, we see it every day. I mean, we have to care about ourselves. I mean, we have to. I think black people need to get together and become a united front and protect one another. That's what we need to do.
Well, I can say, and not my words, the words of Antonio Moore, this movement, the ADOS movement, does that. The ADOS movement codifies us and brings us all under one common banner. It doesn't matter where it happened to you, because as long as we can receive redress, like I said before in the last show, we put our life jacket on and we put our oxygen on, and then we can help the passenger sitting next to us. We can't do it if we don't. If we haven't helped ourselves, we can't help anyone. But
the issue with reparations here in America is, what would be the cost of reparations for an individual whose great-great-grandparents were slaves? How do we calculate the reimbursement for that labor?
I'm glad you mentioned that. There are people smarter than me. One, for example, is Sean Rochester, an engineer from University of Chicago. He has actually, in his book, The Black Tax, come up with those figures. Dr. William Sandy Darity, along with Dr. Derek Hamilton and his group, they've actually come up with the figures based on, in some of the books, based on gross domestic product, and some based on the reparations idea and where they started, the 40 acres and a mule. There's been a few different formulas to how we can get there. I don't think getting to the formula is the problem. I think spending the last 300 years talking about it, specifically when it comes to HR 40, spending the last 30 years talking about it. My dad's speech, which was 50 years ago, we spend too much time talking about trying to figure out how to talk about reparations. I mean, I use an example. Go ahead.
But the problem would be getting it passed through the government. I believe that if somehow reparations got to the floor, and first of all, we will only be able to get reparations if the Democrats are in office and control the government. That the Republicans will never allow that to happen. And if reparations pass, we have to understand that there'd be a total backlash by white America for those reparations. You understand that by Democrats giving us reparations, that might cause a whole lot of white Democrats vote Republican, so that never happens. You know,
we've only got 1 minute. In answer to that question, I'm going to bring us back to the Civil War and slavery to begin with. When the Civil War started, after Civil War, black people were Republicans. Lincoln, Republican. We did not switch to being Democrats, until
the 1960s.
Exactly. So it's happened. Guess what? South Africa, they were never going to do away with apartheid. They did it. In America, they were never going to do away with slavery. And another answer to that, they didn't even have to fight a war to do away with slavery. They just could have decided that it was unjust and done away with it. But
the problem, and the reason why they had to fight for slavery, because there was too much money at stake for rich people.
Exactly. But as they say, if you follow the money, you get to the answer. I got 30 seconds left, Nate. Please close up, say your goodbyes. We're going to have you back in studio, and I want to thank you for coming. I love you. It's been 32 years. You're the best brother I know.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Well, I just want to say that, I encourage all African Americans who are listening to this show to spread the word that we need to become involved in this movement for reparations. If we should be entitled to some form of reparations for what our ancestors went through. That would start the healing. It wouldn't complete the healing, but it would start the healing.
Okay. And I need the last word here. The victim gets to decide the payout. The victim gets to decide to be made whole.
And that's going to be the fight. What is someone owed for the labor of their forefathers? What is owed?
We can figure it out. We figured it out for many groups. Thank you, America. People's Forum right back at you. ADOS movement. We're here.